Thank you, Madam Chairman. This is an act concerning non-compete agreements. I really do wish we worked harder on making the titles a little more explicit, since this has to do with effectively eviscerating non-compete agreements. I don't know that would be a title that LCO might choose, an act eviscerating non-compete agreements. But effectively, that's what it is. And, you know, I heard the testimony, and I've heard the comments from some of my colleagues about the desire to protect some low-wage employees from unscrupulous business practices, and I'm certainly sympathetic to that. And I can completely understand that somebody who's going to work in a fast food restaurant or something shouldn't be expected to sign some giant 100-page document that has a lot of contractual language and restrictions on their further employment choices. I'm sympathetic to that in one way, but in another way, I also do believe that, as I mentioned earlier in this meeting and during the public hearing, that private contract between their employer and employee, again, is between them. And every aspect of it, in my mind, is their decision and not ours. So the thing about the bill is that the bill doesn't go out of its way to protect low-income workers. In fact, it imposes these restrictions on people that are currently making as much as $90,000 per year for employees, and the sky's the limit for independent contractors. If it was limited to something in the sub 50,000, sub 40,000 range, then you might be making a compelling argument that you're trying to propose a solution, which I don't know that there's a problem. I've never had anyone approach me and say that they work in a fast food restaurant and they have a non-compete agreement, but I take the folks at their word that that's happening. At the end of the day, though, they should have the choice to engage in whatever private contract that they want to. The bill that's before us really does, as I said, eviscerate the notion of non-compete agreements. And what I think is missing from this conversation is the value of these agreements in the real world. They do perform a service, and that service is not always to the benefit of the employer. I mean, that's the mentality, I think, of the majority, is that there's this constant desire, protect the employee from that unscrupulous employer, that mean old corporation, et cetera, et cetera. And that's just not what's happening here. There are people on the employee side of this equation that benefit from these agreements. And if these agreements go away, their opportunity to benefit goes away with it. And not only does an opportunity to benefit go away, but the whole entire opportunity for that job to exist may go away. There are industries that can only survive if the employers are allowed to protect their assets in a certain contractual arrangement with the people that they employ. And that's it. That's the matter of fact. People in the insurance industry, they hire employees who have direct knowledge and communication with their client base. If the employer is the one investing all of the risk and all in the money of developing that client base, they ought to be able to protect that asset and not allow an employee to walk off with their client list and their book of business. That just makes common sense. And what you will be doing if you eliminate the ability for employers to be able to protect their asset by contractual agreement is a situation where those businesses will no longer be able to succeed. They'll no longer be able to enter into contractual agreements with people to grow their business, because there will be too much fear involved with the potential downside, because this body, the state of Connecticut, once again has decided that they know better than the people on the street. Our job is not to protect people from themselves. That's not our job. I can't say it enough. Our job is to protect the rights of our constituents so that they can go and pursue their own endeavors in life. That's what our job is. And all effort that is put into lawmaking here ought to be focused on that goal, which is to protect the opportunity of people to go ahead and find new ways to create their own success. That is the American model. And instead, what is happening, primarily in this committee, maybe more than a lot of others, is stifling opportunity by suggesting that employees cannot defend themselves and the state must intervene and set up rules that prevent a transaction from occurring. Even the minimum wage is an example of that. And I don't want to go too far on a tangent and be scolded by the chairman, but I'll just say that when you set a minimum wage, you're effectively telling parties that might want to engage in a business arrangement for less than minimum wage that they can't do that, even if both of them are completely willing to do so. To me, that is a negative aspect of having a minimum wage. And that's the same situation here. You know, I mentioned during the public hearing that I was an insurance agent in my late 20s, early 30s, and I was given many opportunities to go and become successful by people that owned a company. And I signed a non-compete, and I did it with my eyes open. I knew exactly what I was doing, and I knew I was being afforded that opportunity because I was willing to sign that agreement. And I profited from it. I had a great paying job, and I had a great opportunity. And as time went on, I worked on the negotiation I had with my employer, and we ended up revising contracts, and I got part ownership in the company and the book of business. But that owner needed to be able to develop that relationship with me as I needed to develop it with him. And what we're doing here is just a carte blanche, using a bomb for something that doesn't even require a knife to tweak around the edges. It's very, very dangerous. And the limitations that are in here are also very concerning. Let me just talk about the language in the bill really quick. Section 2 runs through a list of the only ways that a non-compete agreement could remain enforceable in the state. And this list is just like, it's unreal. For one thing, the first one is that it cannot be enforceable for a period of more than 1 year. Well, I'll tell you, there are many, many types of activities that are still completely viable after a year. Certainly an insurance company's book of business would still be very viable to pursue if you left a company 1 year later and decided to wait out the clock and go ahead and try and take the customers that don't belong to you, that belong to your employer. And then these following statements are just incredibly vague. I understand what's happening in this bill is we are shifting the burden of proof onto the employer to defend themselves in the validity of a non-compete agreement by setting up these hurdles. Line 72 says that employer would have to prove that agreement is a legitimate business interest, ultimately if there's a dispute in court. I believe that anything that they say is a legitimate business interest ought to be a legitimate business interest. And if it's not a legitimate business interest, then why is the employee agreeing to participate in that agreement? 78, line 78, the covenant is no more restrictive than necessary. Well, who determines that? Is the court or the state or the labor committee today going to decide what is actually more restrictive than necessary? We're not there. We're not working in that industry. We're not working in that business. We don't have direct knowledge of what that is. It's awful bold for us to be passing laws, setting up rules for things we know nothing about. Written copy is provided. I suppose that makes perfect sense. A statement of the workers' rights. Well, I mean, that's another activity that seems to go on in this committee too. We just heard in the last bill that, again, we're making employers do the job of the state. The state's mandating them that you are now the purveyor and deliverer of retirement benefits to your employees, and you're also bookkeeper for the state of Connecticut. Are those people being compensated for that? No. And in this case, the employer is going to be required to be able to distribute information that the state requires, and they will not be compensated for that either. On and on and on. The employment or contract relationship was not terminated by the worker for good cause. I mean, who ultimately will decide that? I have a question, Madam Chairman. Lines 101 through 104. Maybe you can tell me what this means. This is one of those conditions that must be met for a covenant to not compete to be valid. It says, if the covenant not to compete is added to an existing employment or independent contractor relationship, The covenant not to compete is supported by sufficient consideration and is not solely the continuation of such employment or contractor relationship. In other words, is it saying that if you want to change the business relationship, you have to pay the employee? Is that correct? And it says sufficient. What determines sufficient?
I believe this speaks to the testimony we heard where an employee entered into employment, and then after having been employed, they were then asked to sign a non-compete. So they, at that point, had already been employed. So this would invalidate that.
Well, and thank you, Madam Chairman. What I'm asking is this is a requirement to maintain a valid non-compete agreement. It's for me, it says that you couldn't just say that the terms of our business arrangement are changing. You would actually have to say, I need you to sign this agreement, and you'd have to provide what it says, sufficient consideration. Is that accurate?
That is accurate.
Well, thank you, Madam Chairman. I would point out that, in an employer-employee relationship, the terms change regularly. Think of almost any job. If the market changes in a particular industry, maybe there's a pandemic, and businesses are shut down. Who knows? Things are changing, and employers need to go to their employees and tell them, say, look, business is great. I'm giving you a raise. Or, you know what? We've been losing clientele to our new competitor across the street for some time, and I'm going to have to reduce the number of employees we have, or we're going to have to change the number of hours. And that has a real world fact and reality. But I know I mentioned the employer, but employees do this also. Employees say, well, you know what? I'm going to start going to the gym on Wednesdays mornings, so I'm going to tell my employer I can't work on Wednesday mornings anymore, and they're going to have to decide whether they want to keep me or not. During the public hearing, that was described as a take it or leave it kind of attitude when the employer does it to an employee. But I just want to point out, not in defense of employers, but in defense of both parties, that both parties have the right to be able to communicate to the other side that they want to alter an agreement, and that is, unless they have a contract stipulating otherwise, their prerogative to do so. And either side is going to have to decide whether they will accommodate those changes. That's the beauty of living in a free society that we're missing here every second with every one of these bills, that we are eliminating the freedom of people to make their own choices. It's the reason why I wanted to be on this committee, because I need to be able to point this out. People need to be able to be free to choose their employment arrangement, to choose their employee arrangement, and their compensation and benefits on their own. And yes, we have an obligation as a state to prosecute bad actors, but that's not what this is. There's no bad actors involved here. This is a bill that would prohibit a perfectly reasonable and profitable practice for both employers and employees that has a legitimate need to exist in a business arrangement, and for no purpose. Because in an alleged protection about that for low-income employees that I don't see a problem for. The limits that are listed here, I think it is in lines 113, 117, it says this would apply to employees up to 3 times the minimum wage. I did the math, 14 times 40 times 52, that's $87,000 a year. That's still a pretty fair and sizable wage, and certainly more than an entry-level salesperson might make or an entry-level insurance agent might make. So I think that by passing this law, you may just eliminate those jobs. You may say, I'm sorry, there's no more entry-level insurance agents, people that are starting a career that might ultimately pay them 6 figures and give them a tremendous quality of life and retirement. Their job is going to disappear because we're effectively making it impossible for their employer to start them off in a way that makes sense. I think that's highly dangerous. The limits for independent contractors make absolutely no sense to me. By virtue of being an independent contractor, you're not paid by the hour. So to point out that there should be a limitation, which I think is 5 times, yes, it says 5 times the minimum fair wage. is the limitation for which this can occur. And I'm thankful that this is a sizable number. Oh, wait a second. No, I'm not thankful, because it's actually worse this way. This makes the number to allow a non-compete agreement so high that it's going to preclude just about any independent contractor arrangement. And that just doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Most people that work in some industries, insurance industry is for one thing, many of them are independent contractors. Because they're not paid on an hourly basis, I don't know how you can give this 5 times minimum wage figure. Also, independent contractors may have multiple people they contract with. You know, they might only contract with some company or employer for a certain, short period of time. I don't want to get into it today, but be prepared. If this bill comes to the floor, I'm going to want to flesh out exactly what this information means, because it doesn't make any sense. I don't think you can set a limit on independent contractors because there is no hourly wage involved. So I don't know what you're multiplying. I don't know if you're working that out or prorating it over the course of a year or what. And I just don't think that that's a workable thing. Section 3 just applies all the same rules to exclusivity agreements, which are more or less the same thing. I want to just also, Section 4 is the one that shifts the burden of proof to the employer. I mean, again, why are we choosing one side or the other in any one of these situations? Shouldn't the facts speak for themselves? Shouldn't the fact that someone entered into a agreement in writing? And again, look, I know the world's not perfect. Every time I have to click the terms of use on something that comes up on my phone, I get mad, because I'm like, I got no choice. I'm signing a contract that I don't want to sign because I want an app on my phone or something. It's ridiculous, and we ought to work on that. But employment agreements are not typically like that. You know, somebody who works for a sales department of some corporation is not just tossed a stack of papers in here, sign this. They understand, and hopefully we're raising intelligent enough people to be able to negotiate the terms of that agreement so they know how they're being compensated and what the agreement is. And people do have the opportunity to set those rules themselves. And if we live in a free society, competition solves that problem as well by allowing someone else down the street to open up a competing business who's actually treating people fairly if someone else is not. 166 through 169 is also, I said egregious at the start of this, and I mean, this is egregious. It says the Attorney General may bring a civil action in Superior Court on behalf of any worker aggrieved. So unlike in every other contractual business dispute where the aggrieved party would have to hire a lawyer and go to court to fight for their compensation, we're effectively saying that the Attorney General of the state of Connecticut now works for employees against employers in the case of non-compete agreements, and they're going to get free representation. I got to say, Madam Chairman, that is like madness. Does the Attorney General even know that we're going to give him this power? Does he even want this power, I wonder? Yeah, there's so much more to say here, but I will reserve all that if this bill ever makes it to the floor of the Senate. And I certainly hope it does not, and I certainly hope it does not in its current form, because this is maybe one of the worst ones on the agenda. This is a job killer, ladies and gentlemen. This will prevent new jobs from being created. It will affect many people that are currently working now when employers find out that they cannot protect their assets legitimately and offer opportunities to, rising stars in their companies. It's a big mistake. We should stay out of private contracts. Thank you, Madam Chairman.